welcome to another video. My name is CJ the Populous New Yorker, and today we're going to be looking at the states of Texas and Georgia and trying to figure out if Joe Biden can actually win these states in the 2020 election. So if we take these two states out of the equation, Joe Biden is at 290 electoral votes to Trump's 194. So Joe Biden does not need either of these states to win the presidency, according to our projection. But if Joe Biden does win these states, let's just say narrowly in either case, he's at 344 electoral votes to Trump's 194, which is very, very bad for Donald Trump and very, very good for Joe Biden. The question becomes, is this outcome even possible? Is it possible that either of these states could flip? Which one is more likely and why? These are things we'll be going over in today's video. The first thing we're going to be looking at is the polls out of this state for the 2020 election. We'll start off with Georgia. And the polls in this state actually have Joe Biden leading in the aggregate, which a Democrat hasn't led in the polls in Georgia since the 1990s. So this goes to show you how historic this is and how much the state has changed in the last 20 years. The state has gotten much more urbanized. The Atlanta metro area has grown exponentially, while the rest of the state really hasn't. The rural areas have stayed relatively stagnant and in a lot of cases have even declined, which has only given more rise to Democrats in the state. Another area where Democrats have been doing very well is the suburbs, especially under the Trump presidency, and that is continuing the leftward shift of the state of Georgia. Right now, Joe Biden is leading in all the polling aggregates as of right now. RCP, 538, 270, etc. These polls, Morning Consult, again, they're all within the margin of error, effectively. This John Ossoff internal poll I'd probably throw away. The Quinnipiac poll, I don't know how reliable that is either, considering it does seem to be an outlier. But the crazy thing about this poll is the majority of polls taken since the end of September have Joe Biden up in the state, which makes it beg the question, is this the year that, Georgia does flip to the Democrats? If we look back at the 2016 election, Georgia went to Donald Trump by 5.1 percentage points, a much smaller than Mitt Romney's, I believe it was 8 percentage points. If we look at the areas where Hillary Clinton did better than her predecessor, Barack Obama, it was here in the Atlanta suburbs. If we look at the change from 2020, the change from 2012, the areas that mostly shifted were areas in and around Atlanta. There were a few shifts in other population centers, but for the most part, it was the Atlanta suburb region here in northern Georgia that shifted. Rural areas shifted more to the right. Now, the only reason why the state stayed red was because there was still enough of the GOP vote here in the rural areas, and the GOP got enough of the vote in the suburban areas to keep the state red in 2016. But given Trump's falling approval in a lot of these areas of Georgia, particularly the Atlanta metro area, it's going to make it much harder for him to get this kind of margin. In fact, I don't think he's going to do any better than in 2016. I almost don't see that as a possibility anymore. If we look at the 2018 midterm elections, the biggest race that Georgia had was for governor between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams. This race was only decided by 1.4 percentage points, and the vote gap was under 50,000 votes. Something, again, Georgia hasn't seen a close race like this since 2008. The Senate race there went to a runoff and then overwhelmingly went to the Republican. But this had an effect down ballot, of course. With lieutenant governor, attorney general, all of these races were very close. Of course, the closest to them being the governor's race, the most high-profile one. Something interesting to note is that in 2016, Georgia was represented by 10 Republicans and 4 Democrats. And look at the popular vote. So the same year that Trump only won by 5 percentage points, Republicans won their House races by over 20 points. So that in itself is very, very impressive. That indicates that nearly 400,000 Democrats either didn't vote or voted for Republican House candidates. But this is a very solidly Republican margin. If we just fast forward 2 years, that completely erodes away. One of the Georgia House seats flipping, Georgia 6th, Georgia 7th, barely holding on to Republican control. And we see a popular vote margin of 52% to 47%. I don't know what the turnout was in 2016, but again, even with Democratic turnout up, this is very alarming for Republicans in Georgia, how quickly things have shifted in just 2 years. Now, understandably, 2018 was a Democratic wave year. However, the state is growing very fast, and Trump is actually doing worse among white voters, and Georgia is not immune to that trend as well. You'd think it was minority voters where Trump was really going to get killed in states like Georgia and Texas, but interestingly enough, it's actually the slip among white voters. The minority population in either of these states hasn't grown a whole lot between 2016 and 2020. Now, these states are on path to become majority minority states, particularly Texas, which is projected to have a Hispanic majority by, I think, 2040 or 2030 possibly. And Georgia, I think, is 2040. So that is really interesting and will definitely change the political landscape of these states. The last thing we're going to look at here are exit polls. We'll start with the 2016 Georgia exit polls, and then we'll look at the 2018 exit polls. So Donald Trump won males 60 to 37. Hillary Clinton won females 54 to 43. Among age groups, Hillary Clinton won the 18 to 29 demographic by 63 to 33%, so 30 points, and she won 30 to 44 by around 6 points. Older demographics going overwhelmingly Republican. If we look at race, whites made up 60% of Georgia's electorate, 75% of the white vote going to Donald Trump, only 21% going to Hillary Clinton. The black vote is very monolithic, 89% going to Hillary Clinton, 9% going for Trump. The Latino vote, 67 to 27%. And of course, for race overall, 60% of the electorate in Georgia is white. The statistics are exactly the same. Non-white is 40%. The average is still 83-14 because most of the non-white voters in Georgia are African American. And one more thing to look at is college graduates. Those that didn't graduate college broke for Trump, 54 to 43. Those with a college degree broke for Hillary by just 1 point. And again, if we look at college education among race, of course, non-whites is exactly the same as it was up there. But among white non-college men, 85 to 11. So the Republicans have a solid hold on this demographic. But it's only 15%. Among women, it shrinks. White non-college educated women. Oh, these are white college-educated men, so it's still 76-21. White college-educated women is where it starts to kind of slip. So those are the main metrics I really wanted to look at. Of course, conservative, Hillary Clinton got 15% of the conservative vote, mainly because there are black voters that identify as conservative but still vote Democrat. I guess conservative on social issues. And in 2018... we see a massive shift in the demographic breakdown by party. 52% of males voted for Brian Kemp, 46% for Abrams. 51% of females voted for Stacey Abrams, 49% voted for Brian Kemp. This time around, it's interesting because Republicans, did much better with females, but they actually slipped among males a whole lot, which is really interesting. Among the age bracket, 60% of 18 to 24-year-old voters voted for Abrams, 40% for Kemp. If we look at the breakdown among age, here there's still 9% of the electorate. However, Kemp actually did better among this this demographic. Where he really started to slip, however, was down here with the 40 to 49-year-olds. This demographic went to Trump 51 to 45, and this time it only went barely to Brian Kemp. And he actually suffered more with the older demographics. So Kemp actually did marginally better among younger demographics, and he was slipping with older demographics. I keep confusing that with Democrat. And this is very interesting because it's kind of indicative of the Republicans' slip among the senior vote, which was kind of really taken into high gear with the COVID-19 pandemic, in which Trump has consistently pulled underwater with seniors for a while now. Broken down by race, whites still make up 60% of the electorate, the exact same as in 2016. Kemp wins them 74-25. So Stacey Abrams improves slightly among white voters. Among black voters, 93-6, Stacey Abrams has a more solid hold on them. Latinos, Kemp actually does a lot better, 62-37. So the biggest movements we have here are with the African American vote and the white vote. Of course, the last thing I want to look at is, I guess we'll do race by gender as well. 73% of white men voted for Kemp, 75% of white women. That's interesting. I've never seen a race where women were more conservative than men. Um, and if we look at education by gender, white college women was only 57-43 for Brian Kemp. White college women in 2016 was 63-34. So the biggest moves toward the Democratic Party were among college-educated voters and actually older white voters, and African American voters going to Democrats. And of course, by party ID, very, very, very partisan. However, Stacey Abrams did win both independent men and independent women in 2016. If we look at that party breakdown, wherever it may be, I think it was over here. Yeah, Trump won independents 52-41. So in a lot of red states, independents break for Republicans. No change in 2016. That's exactly what happened. This time in 2018, they broke for the Democrat, which is really fascinating. So that's basically the breakdown of Georgia. Well, I'll give my verdict on these two states at the end of the video. Now we're going to move on to the second state of this video, which is the state of Texas. So Texas is 38 electoral votes, and Trump couldn't have won the 2016 election without it. If we go to the polling average in Texas, and I just like to use Wikipedia because they have all the polls instead of me going to the individual sites, Trump is still up in the aggregate. However, in the latest polls, he is doing actually, Biden is doing a little bit better. So Biden is almost kind of having a late surge in the state of Texas. Trump ahead in the aggregates by around 3 to 4 points, but then some of the more updated polls have him up just barely in the aggregate. And Texas has been interesting because the entire race, Joe Biden has been fairly competitive. In fact, he was almost more competitive in the past, particularly during the pandemic period, than he is now. So it's like Trump has kind of regained his lead in the state of Texas, but it's still a very slim one at that. This is a state he won, if we look back in 2019. This is a state he won by 9 points. If we look at the areas that changed the most from 2012, it was, by no surprise, the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex up here, the Houston area, and of course the Travis County, Austin kind of area down in San Antonio. And actually, interestingly enough, some rural counties shifted slightly to the left. But the most significant surges over to the left were in urban and suburban counties. What I think is most fascinating is these counties of Collin and Denton County. These were counties that went very solidly for Romney. Still went to Trump by a solid margin, but much less so. And in some cases, Republicans even dropping their share of the vote. Well, not here, but in areas like Harris County, Republicans dropped their share of the vote by around 40,000. So really, these areas are where Trump and the Republicans are really doing poorly. And again, the suburban flight from the Democratic Party isn't just confined to Georgia and the North. It's also happening here in Texas as well. If we go to the general election results, sorry, the midterm election results from 2018, we'll just go to the whole state as a profile. The Senate race was quite a nail-biter for Republicans. Polls didn't indicate the race being this close, but at the end of the day, the polls actually underestimated Democrats, and Ted Cruz barely held on to his seat, only 50.9% of the vote to 48.3%. This was a state that just 4 years ago was considered safe Republican and would never even come close to flipping to Democrat, and all of a sudden 4 years later, this happens. This could probably be attributed to a surge in turnout, particularly among Democratic voters, Hispanics, and liberal whites. making the state very, very close. And again, these urban counties only getting more Democratic. In fact, Fort Worth, one of the, if not the largest Republican metropolitan area, actually flipped to Beto O'Rourke by 0.7% or just a few thousand votes. In the other statewide races, Fort Worth did stay red, but not by a whole lot. It only went to Greg Abbott by around 11 points. If we look at these other races, it only went to Republicans by around 3, in some cases 1 point. So Fort Worth, one of the most conservative urban areas in the country, barely hanging on for Republicans. The only race where Republicans did really well there was, of course, Greg Abbott, who is a very popular governor, running up against Lupe Valdez, who is a very unknown Democratic challenger. And this is kind of the margins we've come accustomed to in a state like Texas. This is like a general election margin from around 2008. You know, the Republican getting around 55%, the Democrat 42%. But this is during a blue wave year, so I guess there's some hope there that when you run the right candidate in Texas for Republicans, they can do fairly well. However, Greg Abbott was the incumbent, keep in mind. He also won 42% of the Hispanic vote, which is a very high share even for Texas. Texas Hispanics usually vote around 36% Republican. In this case, it was 42, which is probably why the margin was much more lopsided. Greg Abbott almost got 40% in Dallas County, and he actually didn't do too much better in Collin and Denton than Donald Trump did, but he did better in Tarrant County. Didn't really improve in Austin, but did better in Bexar County, and actually did slightly better in the southern border region of the state. If we look at the 2018, well, no, we'll go to the 2016 House results for the state of Texas. Republicans got 57% of the popular vote to Democrats 37%. Keep in mind, Trump only won this state by 9 points. However, there were definitely some Democrats that voted for Hillary Clinton and also voted for Republicans, as evidenced by this. If we go to 2018, however, and notice Republicans have a vote share of around 1.7 million. If we go to 2018, that number drops to around 300,000. Republicans getting just 50.4% of the popular vote to Democrats 47. So Democrats in the House level doing only slightly worse than Beto O'Rourke. Republicans in the House level actually underperforming Ted Cruz. But this just goes to show you the drastic change that can happen to a state in 4 years. And part of this can be attributed to the suburban flight from the Republican Party. Another can be attributed to Donald Trump not appealing to sunbelt voters in sunbelt states like Texas and Georgia. Finally, we're going to be looking at the exit polls from Texas from 2016 to 2018. In 2016, Donald Trump got males 57 to 37. Hillary Clinton barely won females 49 to 47. In 2012, Romney actually won females by a few points, I believe. The breakdown by age, Hillary Clinton only won one demographic, that was 18 to 29-year-olds, 55 to 36. Trump narrowly won 30 to 44-year-olds, 48 to 45, and then did much better among older adults. The breakdown by age, more detailed, is kind of the same. Hillary Clinton tying in the 30 to 39-year-olds. Everyone older than that voting pretty solidly Republican, especially seniors. Race, only 57% of the Texas electorate is white. However, they vote at such margins, 69 to 26, that it's enough to keep the state red. Hispanics voting for Hillary Clinton 61 to 34%, blacks 84 to 11%, and Asians 72 to 26, making up 5% of Texas's population. Among breakdown by race in total, whites again, the same exact thing. Non-whites 66 to 29, 43% of the population. So we're getting to a point where non-white is almost the same as the white population, and that will probably happen in the next decade or so. So that really goes to show you what's at stake and how Republicans need to do a better job at reaching out to minority communities, or they will lose the state of Texas. It's inevitable if that trend continues. If we look at education, the only group by educational attainment that did not go to Donald Trump was non-whites, 66 to 29, the same exact thing. White college women, 59 to 35. white non-college women 74 to 23, and then white non-college men I think is really interesting, 77 to 19. So white voters in Texas are not as conservative as white voters in Georgia. However, they're still very overwhelmingly conservative compared to in other states. Now, the white demographic as a whole does vote Republican nationally, but only by around a few points overall. In this case, though, this is very, very overwhelmingly in favor of Donald Trump and the Republicans. If we just fast forward to 2 years in 2018 to the Senate race, Hillary Clinton, Beto O'Rourke won females by around 8 points, 54 to 46. Ted Cruz winning males 56-43. The gender breakdown, there's actually more males voting in this election than in 2016. If we go down to age, Beto O'Rourke winning 18 to 24-year-olds overwhelmingly 68 to 32. That number was only 58-32 last time, so the number for Democrats heavily increased. The number of Republicans was about the same. 25 to 29-year-olds, millennials in this case, actually more liberal in Texas than Generation Z, which is kind of interesting. 73 to 26. The same age group was a lot closer, though, 51-41. Now, keep in mind, some of the people in this bracket might have moved up to the 30 and 39-year-old bracket, which went to Beto O'Rourke barely by a couple points. Once you get over that, these groups are solidly Republican. 40 to 49-year-olds is not, however. Ted Cruz only winning that voting block by around 6 percentage points. Donald Trump won that voting block by 13 percentage points. So it goes to show you the massive shift among these groups. And by race, whites only make up 56% of the electorate this time. So again, a drop of only 1 point. However, that makes all of the difference. Of course, then again, this was a Democratic wave year, so turnout among minorities was probably up slightly among, as opposed to white voters. 66% for Cruz, 34% for O'Rourke, 69% for Trump, 26% for Clinton. So that is where the major shift happened. Sure, there was some movement. The Democrats did better among black and Hispanic voters, but Republican margins stayed relatively the same. The biggest shift was actually with white voters, and I would guess that these are white suburbanites in the Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and Austin areas. And again, if you break this down by race, by gender, white men still ultra conservative. White women, though, only 60 to 39%. That was not the case last time. It was 66-29% in 2016. That number has shifted heavily to the left. White men actually got slightly more Democratic, but that's no surprise considering it's a Democratic wave year. But the rest of these was really interesting. I'd like to see what the others is because they somehow voted for Ted Cruz. Maybe those are Vietnamese or something, possibly. But that is kind of interesting. But again, Latino women, Latino men, these numbers are just around the same as 2016. The biggest movement was actually among white voters. And if we go by education, white college men for the first time being tied in Texas in God knows how long, 49 to 49. If we go down to education by gender, I guess we can go among whites. White college-educated men, white college-educated men, 66 to 26%. That's a massive. Oh wait, that was women. I'm stupid. But either way, white college-educated women, 59-35. That's still a massive shift over to the left. The amount of the electorate also increased too, which probably left to a further shift to the left. But this is where the biggest movement happened with suburban women, and this is something that's been going on since 2016, but is often talked about a whole lot. However, both of these races, the Georgia gubernatorial and the Texas Senate, happened in 2018 during a wave year. My final verdict on this state, I still think the state of Texas will go to Donald Trump by a lean margin, and I think the state of Georgia will also go to Donald Trump by around 1 or 2 points. However, these states are very, very, very much in play in 2024. In fact, if Trump does win a second term, I would almost bet you a lot of money that Georgia would probably flip in that case, and possibly the state of Texas as well. That's given if current trends continue, if Republicans don't do better reaching out to certain communities. and also don't try to fix their brand from the Trump campaign, which has actually been tarnished among a lot of voters. And you've seen the real shift. Rural voters have become more Republican, whereas urban and suburban have become more Democrat. And the urban and suburban areas are where most of America lives. So if you can get the suburbs, you can keep Republican control of these states. If Democrats hold on to the suburbs, they will eventually have both the state of Georgia and the state of Texas come 2024, and as an extension possibly states like Florida. Florida is an exception to the rule though, because a lot of older Republicans from the Northeast and blue states do flock to Florida and tend to vote Republican. And also you have a large Cuban population. So Florida might be the only state that, though its demographics are very not favorable to Republicans, groups like Cubans, who are a big chunk of the Latino population, and also older white voters, keep this state red. And I still think it'll stay red in 2020. However, it could be by around a 0.5% margin. However, it would still be very, very close nonetheless. Anyway, that is it for today's video. So what you can take away from this: Texas and Georgia very much shifting blue, probably in 2024 if current trends continue. If Donald Trump wins the presidency, both of these states will most likely flip in 2024. If Donald Trump loses the presidency, Republicans can still, not Oklahoma, not Kansas either. Republicans can still hold out hope for these two states in the future. But again, provided the demographic shifts that are happening in these states, unless Republicans improve with minority populations and urban and suburban populations, these states will inevitably in the future become solid blue strongholds. So anyway, that's the takeaway from this video. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up. If you have any comments or you disagree with me for whatever reason, you can comment down below. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss any new videos. And I hope to see you all in the next one. Thank you all for watching.